Well, good afternoon, everybody, and it's wonderful to be here on day one of this amazing event focusing on innovation. I'm particularly pleased to be here talking about climate resilience and climate resilience at the city level. So before I introduce my three panelists, and ask them to join me on the stage, I'm just going to say a little bit about some of the work that I have been doing in London with the Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, publishing the London Climate Resilience Review back in July last year. So this was a piece of work that I was commissioned to do by Sadiq after the 2021 surface water floodings in London and also the 40-degree heat we experienced in July 2022. And the idea was to look at whether London, Greater London, is ready for those climate shocks that we are experiencing today, and most importantly, to talk about some of the recommendations. And I'm delighted that I've got with me, and he'll be joining me shortly, Mete Koban, who is the Deputy Mayor working on the environment agenda, and he's going to be telling us a little bit more about the progress that has been made since we published the report. Brief summary up there, so 50 recommendations, 25 of them to the Mayor himself. He talked about them in his manifesto when he was up for election last May, and really pleased when the report was launched in July that he accepted all of the recommendations made to him, but also agreed to work on engaging with whether it's national government, local authorities, businesses, communities, on all of the recommendations, which will make London better prepared for extreme heat, flooding, drought, wildfire, and many of these events have been playing out again since those events that triggered the review in the first place. So great to be talking to Mete shortly. Another piece of work that I have been doing since then is with Public First, where we have narrowed our focus onto flooding as part of a bit of work that we're doing on wider impacts, but looking at how you move from climate risk, the risk of flooding, into resilience for communities, for the economy, and also for growth. So these are some of the headline findings that we came up with in that research. So every year, £2.4 billion worth of damage from flooding. We also looked at productivity and then how recovering from flooding also leaves a long tail. And below that, you'll see some of the comments. The clue is in the name, with Public First, getting out into the community to understand how individuals feel unsafe in their communities once they've been flooded, and how if you invest in flooding, you shift from being insecure to being strong and resilient. We've seen that in places like Leeds, where over a period of many years, moving from a blighted city from flooding to one that is much stronger, able to deliver growth and opportunity. Similarly, some public engagement, some polling which showed that the general public are aware of the growing risks of flooding, feel insecure in their houses if they've experienced it, feel that they are being left alone, but then also see that there's a massive opportunity to get this right. So again, delighted that I've got also joining Mete two other mayors of different combined authorities in the north that can talk about some of the opportunities they see with their cities moving from risk to resilience. I want to leave you with one final slide, and this comes from an amazing exhibition that I saw in the Building Centre yesterday. I was lucky enough to catch the tail end of it, and it's a project that Shade, the UK, has done with various partners, about 40 degrees stories, what it was like to be in London during those two and a bit days where we experienced that mini heat wave, but at temperatures that we just were not expecting in the UK. And I've chosen this one because Tabitha was a teacher, and how we will see our learning of our children change in overheating classrooms, even at lower degrees, even at temperatures that we're experiencing today in London. If you're in a south-facing classroom, you are going to be overheating as a teacher and overheating as a student. So on that note, I would like to welcome my three guests to join me on the panel. So Andy Burnham from Greater Manchester, Steve Rotherham from Liverpool, and Mette, who's Deputy Mayor of London, on the environment brief. So please join me over here. Welcome, and fantastic that you are able to join me today on the first day of Innovation Zero. And there's an amazing buzz in the audience and here at Olympia because of all of the technologies that could help us with climate resilience and getting ready for the impacts that we're now experiencing. Later today, this evening, there is going to be a File on 4 programme focusing on flooding, and it was triggered by the New Year's Day flooding, Andy, that was all around your city. And I know that you were very actively involved, as you have been in many years. We used to meet when I was chair of the Environment Agency on the flood agenda and getting ready for these impacts which are happening more and more regularly. I was also inspired by your appearance on the podcast Leading with Rory Stewart and Alistair Campbell, where you talked about some of the special powers that mayors have, and you focused in on the power of convening. So when you don't have the necessary powers or finance devolved to the city level, that you have a massive opportunity to work with other politicians, the other parts of the community, businesses, to focus on your role of delivering better things for your city. So focusing on climate resilience, how do you use those powers? What more powers do you need? And how are things going, particularly with a new government? Over to you.
Well, thank you, Emma. Afternoon, everybody. There is a real buzz, actually. You can feel it. And I hope the big message is coming out of this conference, and particularly aimed over the Atlantic. There should be no turning away from net zero, in my view, and that's how we feel in the Northwest, and I'm sure it's how London feels as well. It's the future, face up to the future. It's where new prosperity lies, and I hope, as we come through the spending process we're now in with the new government, we come through with a set of plans and funding that allows us really to go for that green future, which we're completely committed to. In terms of the mayoral role and what we can do here around resilience, I think there is a big role to play. The convening power of the mayor is the superpower. And you will see that Steve and I and Sadiq, and obviously Mette here to represent Sadiq, we've all used it in different ways. For us, most recently in Greater Manchester, with regard to public transport, where we've created the B network, the first London-style public transport system outside of London, and it's about integrating a fragmented system, making it work as a system, and that's already there. We're doing the same now with technical education, but actually we've done the same with water and water management, because we look at that world and we see again a very fragmented world that comes from the deregulation and the privatization of the 80s and 90s, where organizations are not properly connected with each other to manage these issues. You have the Environment Agency that you used to chair, Emma, doing good work, but is it fully connected up with the water industry? Well, no is the answer to that, and it's a overly fragmented situation, and it has led to a failure, I think, to prioritise the right schemes when it comes to flood resilience. We did have another really difficult New Year's Day when some of our most deprived communities flooded very significantly. A place near where I live called Platt Bridge in Wigan, 10 feet of floodwater in the centre of this locality. Really not good at all, and no messaging given to the residents because the systems weren't in place. No river gauge on the river near where they are. Where we're coming from, I've finished on this point, is we believe all areas should be moving to an integrated water management plan. And I think we're the first city region in the UK to go down this path where we get all the players around the table and the mayor and the combined authority convene all the players to say, look, we need to go at this differently. We need more nature-based solutions because they can play a role upstream. But the final thing to say is we need to make the case together to government for flood resilience funding as growth funding. Because in that place I mentioned, Platt Bridge, there is a plan for thousands and thousands of new homes not far away. If you don't fix the flooding, you cannot build those homes. And that is a message that really needs to be understood. Flood resilience funding, yes, it fixes a problem, but it also provides a solution. It's growth funding as well.
And that's a key point, Andy, that we wanted to make with the work that I led with Public First. Particularly right now, where many budgets, if you look back to the autumn budget, it says specifically that the flood budget from DEFRA is at risk. And we're seeing with other infrastructure work that we're getting 10-year plans. So having that long-term investment horizon builds the pipeline of projects that can give that safety and security to communities, but will also allow others to invest as well.
Well, Steve will want to talk from his perspective, but together we're publishing a thing today called the Northern Arc. We have new evidence, pretty stunning new evidence actually, that the north-south divide is closing now through the devolution that he and I have pioneered, and that we, if we get the right investment on that corridor from Liverpool through Warrington, Manchester Airport to Manchester, we can get more, a bigger lift to the economy than the Oxcam arc in the southeast. And this is the analysis that we've got. But our argument would be, you've got to put in the enabling infrastructure to unlock that investment. And it's not a sort of thing where the government says, oh, well, we can't afford it. It's essential for growth. And you have to put that in and see it in that way. Otherwise, the growth will not be able to be supported, and the growth will be on the wrong foundations. So we're making this argument today. We are, collectively, the Northwest, the UK's single biggest growth opportunity. That's what the evidence says. We've been growing faster than the UK economy for a decade, but we've always been getting crumbs off the table when it comes to public infrastructure investment. And there's a reason why Platt Bridge doesn't have a flooding scheme. Deprived communities haven't been prioritised under the Green Book and all of the processes the Treasury uses. They've always been at the back of the queue. And what we're saying is we now need to turn that around. If you want the growth, public investment's going to have to come first to the areas where the infrastructure is poorest.
Wonderful, and I brought along a prop because I have looked and dipped into your book, Head North, where you write in italics jointly your foreword, and there's some fantastically inspiring words there that really, I suppose, is where your report that you're publishing today come from, about how infrastructure has not been invested in. Steve, congratulations for this weekend. Chris Boardman,
Don't go there.
Chris Boardman, Andy, who used to work with you, when I shared with him the Public First research, talked about the 120,000 grassroots football matches that are being disrupted on an annual basis now from flooding. So this is impacting so many people. But tell us a little bit more about what you're doing in Liverpool. Thank you.
Thanks, Emma. If it was just about the moral or ethical arguments, then I think we can win that one. But actually, we need to get onto the economic arguments, and they are that there are tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of jobs up for grabs. And we can be a leader in these green technologies. So we're looking at what we can do across the Northwest. Again, Andy's talked about the fact that we can now work together better than the Northwest has ever been able to, because you've got 1, 2, there'll be another Metro Mayor in Cheshire, and then possibly, we'll see what happens in Lancashire. But that means that devolution has come to our area, so we can now start to work cross-boundary, and even, dare I say, who knows what's going to happen in the elections, but cross-party political spectrums as well. And the idea is to look at what the assets in an individual area are, and then to see whether we can maximise those assets. So we've got, obviously, the River Mersey, and we want to do a tidal project on it. And it's really difficult. Andy's just mentioned the Green Book. Now, it's not just the Green Book. There are 2 sets of regulations that sit behind that. One are statutory and the other one are departmental. So the issue is that sometimes it's the interpretation of what Green Book says and the constraints on it, and not just the actuality of what's in the Green Book.
Your
and that's what we're trying to
barrier, though, is both for energy and flood defence, isn't
defence,
it?
yeah.
Because the Mersey floods in Greater Manchester, in Didsbury and Stockport on New Year's Day, that was the River Mersey flooding. So this is the frustration we've both got. The case to give the River Mersey a new tidal barrier for green energy is amazing, but it also solves the flooding problem, doesn't it, as well? So from our point of view, we're right behind Steve in supporting him in making that case.
And I think it's that joining up of both the mitigation agenda with the resilience agenda. Yeah. I think there's a fantastic opportunity coming our way if they take it with the 10-year infrastructure strategy, where we've seen the Infrastructure Projects Association Authority link up with the National Infrastructure Commission, but we really do need this prioritised in the spending review, so that we're not going backwards, we're actually going forwards, because with climate change changing and getting worse, we're not even keeping up with what is required. I'd like to come back to you both on nature-based solutions. Steve, you look like you wanted to make a final.
Yeah, I was going to mention some of the things that we do need to do. I mean, look, it's not always about big projects like a Mersey tidal scheme. It is about what you can do in communities, and lots of that. We've got a community environmental fund, and we go out to really small scale projects, but it gets the community on board because they start to understand the diversity and certainly some of the ecosystem that needs, obviously, all of those bits functioning. Otherwise you get the catastrophes of flooding. We can do things in a different way. A lot of the planning applications, for instance, that are coming forward, we're still pumping all of that into combined sewers, and we need to be able to separate, and you can localise that too. But there are things that we are doing, which is trying to decarbonise energy-intensive industries, and that's being led in the Liverpool City region. Glass Futures are here today, and they're doing some fantastic work with Pilkingtons and other partners around trying to find alternatives to fossil fuels to heat at the right temperatures and give you that resilience. That experimentation is going on as we speak. It's in St Helens in the Liverpool City region, and they've been doing some pioneering work, but there's all sorts of things like HyNet as well. So there are big, really huge infrastructure and strategically important infrastructure projects, but there's also that local level as well.
And organisations like Ashton have set up in the Northwest an initiative called Resilient Roots, and that's all about bringing councils, communities and landowners together to build climate resilience through nature-based solutions. So how can you as mayors help initiatives like that?
I'll go back to what I say, Emma. It's all about an integrated approach led by the Mayor and the Combined Authority. So we have a spatial plan across Greater Manchester which identifies the locations where we seek to bring forward major development in the next decade. I've been in the Treasury this morning making the case for this as part of the spending review. We believe that you need to have a sort of a blue infrastructure strategy and a green infrastructure strategy alongside those major developments, and you have to get all of the players around the table and identify the biodiversity net gain that can come from those major developments and how that can unlock funding to provide high quality green space for our residents, but at the same time capture some of that that excess water, obviously help with air pollution. So, you know, you've got to see all of these things together in one coherent picture. And, you know, we feel we've been able to do that with the, we have a 10-year pipeline for growth in Greater Manchester, 2025 to 2035, but we are absolutely clear that won't just see lots of new towers and, you know, new developments, new stadium possibly for a certain football club who will be coming back at you, I'm sure, before too long. That should also mean a massive upgrade in the green infrastructure of Greater Manchester. It should mean a big upgrade in management of the blue infrastructure, the flooding risk. That's the sweet spot, everybody, we've got to find. How do you bring forward the growth and regeneration, but at the same time you're enhancing the natural environment, you're improving the green space for the residents, and you're reducing the flood risk?
So one of the key findings and recommendations from the London Climate Resilience Review was to pull adaptation and climate resilience into the centre of the Mayor's work. It's over a year since we submitted it ahead of the elections last May, the mayoral elections last May. Mette, tell me, how are things going? What things have, what recommendations have you moved on? What more needs to happen? And given we're just months, weeks, days ahead of the spending review, what are the discussions that you and Sadiq are having around making sure that this is funded as we head into a summer that is looking like it's going to be extremely hot? And with that comes all of the risks: drought, fire, often a heat wave, ends with extreme rainfall and surface water flooding.
Yeah, thank you, Emma, and good afternoon, everyone. It's great to be here. And what an important time to have this conversation, just like Andy says, at a time where, you know, cities can really show leadership on how we can drive climate action. And for us in London, this is really important because it's really as part of our mission to deliver social justice, racial justice, and also economic justice for Londoners. Look, I'll be totally honest and frank with you. I'm not a traditional environmentalist. I came to care about this issue because communities like mine, where I'm from in Hackney, when I go home and I see my parents open their energy bills and they see rising energy costs because we're dependent on fossil fuels, and every time something happens around the world, it affects working class Londoners who are impacted the most. Communities that have done the least to cause the climate crisis are paying the most for it. Or the fact that when the Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, first got elected, they said it will take 193 years to reach legal limits within our pollution levels, and we're on track to reach that. And why is that important? It's because, again, just like Andy and Steve have been saying, it's people who've done the least to cause the crisis who are, again, paying the price for action. So for us, this is about how do we actually get away from, of course it's important to talk about, you know, the dangers of climate change, but actually how do we bring the benefits of climate action closer and actually much more tangible to communities? And actually what Andy was just talking about, the access to creating green space, again, that's a huge social justice issue. You know, if you think about London and the density of, or cities and the density of our housing stock that we have, many residents don't have access to green space or to gardens. And how do we actually create more green space, which can also help create much more vibrant neighborhoods where people actually enjoy living in the cities that they live in, recognizing again that a lot of those people, one, don't have a choice about where they live, or two, have little money to think about actually moving away from highly polluted areas or areas with a lack of access to green space. So as Emma said, we obviously the Mayor commissioned the London Climate Resilience Review, which has been integral to our sort of mission in London. I'm very proud to be working for Sadiq Khan. Sadiq's put environmental action at the heart of his mission during his three terms now as Mayor of London, and has really shown bold leadership, whether it comes to delivering on air quality, but also making sure that we're really taking some of the biggest issues. Andy spoke about water. We've got a plan to clean our waterways in the next 10 years, but that goes hand in hand with also flood resilience, because in Paris, for example, where they cleaned the rivers, what they didn't do so well was they didn't think about the road runoff. So when you think about every time it rains, road runoff goes back into polluting our waterways. And so we have a plan in London to not only clean our waterways in the next 10 years, but within this mayoral term, we want to think about the interlink between the green and blue space, creating nice access to footpaths alongside the waterways, but also making sure that we got the right SUDS investment across London to create that sponge city. We know in 2021 when we had the flash floods in London, again, lots of basement flats were impacted by that. So we're moving rapidly fast on delivering the recommendations of the review, but again, it has to be in partnership with the councils and with lots of our partners. And one of the key things we need to bring, which is exactly the point that Andy and Steve has been landing, is how do we start making the economic case for resilience? And that's something that we're working on in London.
If we could focus a little bit on extreme heat, because I think this is where back in July 2022, across the country, there were at least 3,000 excess deaths, and in London, nearly 400. One of the recommendations we made, which was acted on immediately, was Operation Helios. We borrowed it from Paris, which had run a similar exercise. This time it was looking at 40 degrees over a week and what are the knock-on consequences. During that period in 2022, we saw the wildfires. The fire brigade in London was the busiest it had been since the Second World War. We saw impacts on water, we saw railways and connections to other cities affected as well. If the same happens this year, are we any better prepared in London?
Look, it's such an important... I just ran the London Marathon on Sunday. And my God, running in that heat, that second half felt like I really didn't think I was going to do it. And I do a lot of running. And it just goes to show, like, it's not a coincidence because it's going to get... Marathons will get more tough as we have more extreme temperatures. I think we really need to rapidly accelerate the delivery of street trees across London and being able to support the boroughs to help cool the temperatures of our street. But we also got to think about our housing. London's very different to different parts of the UK. And one of the conversations that I've been having with the team at the GLA is thinking about our retrofit strategy. So you've got this really bizarre system in London where every council is bidding and competing against each other to get money from government to retrofit. For the first time in London, we've set up Warmer Homes London, where we've led a consortium bid, being able to unlock £232 million that is going to improve energy efficiency levels on 22,000 of our homes. That means that in the summer, when it gets really hot, we can actually make sure that we have much more cooler homes, because we know it affects elderly residents in particular. But in the winter, we can help make sure that we've got much more hotter homes, so that actually we can help save money on energy bills as well. So I think Andy really, I think, captured this correctly, is that you can't just look at these policies in isolation. It's got to be a holistic approach. You've got to think about your housing strategy. You've got to think about infrastructure utilities. You've got to think about the green and blue spaces. You've got to think about all of these things collectively. And that's why what we're currently doing in London is helping devise a climate action plan, our latest version, that will be ready by the end of the year. And that will hopefully help set out the framework for how we're going to be working with the councils to really deliver on our mission to reach net zero by 2030.
Have you noticed that I talk more about water than extreme heat, because we have a little bit of a bigger problem with that in rainy Greater Manchester?
Yeah, but I think we have to look at the country as a whole and understand how we're all connected as well. Yeah. I think flood budget and the conversations that we all need to be having with government right now are essential, because I think if you look at all of the investment we need in housing, in infrastructure, including water, if it's not ready for the climate change we know that is locked in for decades to come, then we risk going backwards and undermining those incredibly positive investments.
Well, let me just give you a really clear illustration of the point that you've just made. So Steve and I are coming up to 8 years in our mayoral roles. I have responsibility for Greater Manchester Fire and Rescue Service. In the 8 years in my role, I have actually had to deal with extreme heat once, which you might remember was the wildfires on the hills above Greater Manchester in the summer of 2018, and I was there with Greater Manchester Fire and Rescue Service, and we were trying to deploy air assets, which I discovered didn't exist at that time, and we were really struggling with that situation. And then on New Year's Day, I think the number was 500 people were evacuated by boat from their properties in Greater Manchester, some in Stockport where the Mersey flooded, but others in Plattbridge, as I mentioned before. Now, wildfires and floods, neither of those are statutory responsibilities. Well, wildfires, there is more of a connection there, of course, with the fire risk, but there's no funding to support that. With relation to flooding, there is no recognition of the statutory responsibility of fire and rescue services to provide a response. And that just shows you how the thinking in the centre of government has not caught up with the changing world. It's purely a local decision of ours to invest in the flood equipment, in the boats, and in that other support. But the Fire Brigades Union would still say, you know, why is flooding not a statutory responsibility of fire and rescue services across the country and funded? It still isn't. But that just shows you that the country has not fully got its head into the space of what we need to do to build a resilient Britain in the 21st century.
Steve, you wanted to come in.
Yeah, only because Meta mentioned before about that collaboration that you need to have, and if you pull people together, we talked about the convening powers of them. Actually, areas outside of our geography have an impact often on what's within our administrative boundaries. So, for instance, public transport, we run trains outside of the geography of the Liverpool City region, and sometimes the flooding effect of that is inhibiting our performance levels, sometimes by 2 or 3%, and that's the difference between us being the best in the whole country in Europe and just sort of average. But that's because flooding risk, when they build new developments, often they forget about the likes of rail infrastructure. And so our rail infrastructure, because they build new housing estates and it's not able to pump away the volume of the water, then we're getting a detrimental impact on that. And the other things that I think people are really interested in is what's happening, you know, within their own communities. And that's where the nature recovery stuff, we've got a fantastic strategy that's been through the sausage machine of the Combined Authority, but that nature recovery strategy is starting to affect the way we think. And just before I came here, I was with REBA, and we're getting planners now to start thinking about things right at the very beginning. But that's new build. Actually, retrofitting, and you mentioned it before, retrofitting is enormous. And we're going to have to, if we're going to all hit our really ambitious net zero carbon targets, we're going to have to do something with the housing stock that we currently have. And we've spent 110 million so far on retrofitting. We've done 10,000 properties in the Liverpool City region. It's obviously more expensive for you to do one property than it is for us to do one property. But that link between that environmental justice and social justice is that it's some of our most deprived communities who are paying to heat the outside of the house because these are the least energy efficient homes. I've got evidence that it's about £50 per week saving during the winter to a household. I mean, that's a lot of money when, you know, people on this panel have fought for when there was the reduction of £20 per week on the allowances. So £50 is the difference between people being able to heat and eat. And of course, we're not adding to the carbon burden and being able to reduce our overall footprint.
I think we often forget how stark this is for individuals on a day-to-day basis, and certainly having listened to the File on 4 programme today, comes across how this is impacting people on a daily basis.
Yeah. To pick up Steve's point and go back to where I started, we're not flinching from the journey to net zero, and nor are you, nor is anyone on this panel. For us, it's a 2038 journey. That's where we are still on the path. It's getting hard, but the big change we've made to public transport has really cut our emissions, and it's really helping. And as Steve says, we've all got to turn our attention to housing and retrofitting housing. The thing is, if you do this the right way, you can do exactly what Steve just said. This can be a journey towards climate justice and social justice, dealing with the climate crisis and the cost of living crisis at the same time. If you give people greener public transport and greener homes, you can do something really significant about their income and what they've got to spend. And I think we need to see these two things together. This path is a path to a fairer society where everybody is in a position to live a better
and
life.
Jobs as well, jobs.
And jobs,
you know,
the jobs that fall out of retrofit.
skills.
You know, you're talking tens of thousands of good jobs linked to the construction industry.
Yeah.
But again, it points to a more devolved approach to this. You know, and we're still arguing with the Department for Education and others about giving us the powers over technical education and the construction industry. You know, Steve's been the leading voice on this. But you know, we're on that path to 2038. We're still not getting off it. And I think it'd be really empowering if all of us, post the spending review, feel we've got enough to carry on that journey and make Britain a green leader at the end of it.
That's brilliant. You're both in your third term. Sadiq is in his third term too. This is a time where you have the same political politics as the main government. And yet, tomorrow we have the Committee on Climate Change publishing its adaptation progress report. I suspect that it's not going to read comfortably for this government. What are the conversations that you are having to encourage them to really make progress on getting ready for the climate impacts that we are experiencing today? Responsibility for this sits in the Department of Environment, and yet we've talked about housing, we've talked about local government, we've talked about transport, we've talked about education. It's impacting everywhere, including Treasury and the investments that Treasury needs to make. What reassurance can you give us, or how can we help you to emphasize how essential this is to get right, and what a massive opportunity it will be to unlock both growth, but also if we get it wrong, we could go backwards and undermine all of the amazing investment opportunities that are being talked about here today.
I mean, you know, Andy and obviously Steve are much more closer to the conversation with government, and obviously I'm here speaking on behalf of the Mayor of London. But I think there is real progress that has been made since the last general election. I think for the first time from London's perspective, certainly London is no longer a dirty word. In the previous government, they were working against London and levelling down London at the of course we want to level up the whole of the country, and I think London has a role to collaborate and work with other cities like we do with Transport for London on, you know, the manufacturing of new trains, for example, that also benefit other regions, and to thinking about energy generation. I think we've got to think about all those things, and I think there's been huge progress through the mayor's networks and working through with government. I think, of course, you know, like I understand that people want to see progress happen yesterday, and we haven't got time to wait. But I think there's been loads of good announcements that have been, and certainly good things that are happening in London since we've had a new government. The other thing that I'll just quickly say, sorry, I'm slightly reverting back to the previous points, but the one thing that we mustn't forget about in this conversation is that everything we're doing is about people, right? And there's a real danger that sometimes we know we have to move very quickly to take action because the planet can't wait. But at the same time, Steve's point, you've got to co-produce, co-design, and really create that sense of shared ownership among people. Because sometimes you could deliver a great policy, but if you don't get the how you do it right, people feel like you're doing to them rather than working with them. And so for us, it's really important that actually this is a really fundamentally an opportunity about thinking about localizing the conversation to neighborhoods, thinking about how do you create that agency where people can actually shape the future of neighborhoods through the infrastructure, the green infrastructure, the blue infrastructure, all of the sort of important resilience work that needs to happen. So I think we mustn't sort of lose sight about in the next 5 years where we need to rapidly move fast, how do we get the balance of delivery via making sure that we're working with citizens?
In that fantastic book that you've got there, you can show it to everyone. There you go, by two young authors, Burnham and Rotherham. But actually what we do say in there quite clearly is that when we're talking about levelling up the country, we're not talking about levelling down London. It's really important to us that London continues its growth and it's on the right trajectory. What we're saying is that the latent potential of areas like ours is huge to UK PLC, and you can do that. Now, I'm going to go back to something you've just said there, Emma. You said, what is it that we can do? That's exactly the point. It's for far too long, it's been seen as being one group doing something. We need everybody collectively to be doing this. People can lobby in MPs. People can work through their councils and their metro mayors. We need a loud voice down there to I have to say, to counter some of the siren voices from Farage and co. Because that's where the argument is at. And we need to take the political argument to them to prove that actually it's not costing everybody a fortune. If we don't do anything, it will cost everybody a fortune. And we need to have those economic arguments ready to put to them to, try and destroy the naysayers.
Absolutely.
Right.
Andy, because I think you have to leave really promptly. That's what I've been told, but do you want to? Maybe not.
Well, I just very much agree with what Steve and Mette have just said. I come back to where I started today. I think an opportunity is opening up for Britain as other countries around the world turn away from the path to net zero. That leaves that path more open for us, does it not? I think it does. And I think we've got to have the courage of our convictions in this moment. I think the government did the right thing intervening in relation to the steel industry, but let's have a plan for green steel then quickly now and really make that work. And then if you get that, well, maybe we can build a green railway between Liverpool and Manchester. It was the world's first commuter railway in 1829. And wouldn't it be a great thing for Britain to be a leader in green railways, zero carbon railways?
Resilient railways, built with materials that will withstand the
resilient
flooding.
Railways. And I think this is where you can kind of get to here. If you actually lean in now, you can make Britain a green leader. And I think this isn't the time to sort of tiptoe. I think it's the time to commit to that path. And I hope the spending review sets up the 3 big cities that you see here. The biggest piece of innovation net zero, to pick up the name of this conference, is to fund his tidal barrier. Imagine what that would mean for Britain, to go into that emerging technology and commit to it in the north of England. Hydrogen, HyNet was mentioned. Green hydrogen is a massive thing that the Northwest, we could become a net exporter of green hydrogen if we invest in it now and commit to it now. And that will be my message to the government. We can really kind of come through this period where the country hasn't felt it's known where it's going, where we've lacked a direction. And it takes any government time to find their feet and deal with the problems they inherit, and this one has had some big problems. But through the spending review, if we get this right, I think this is a time to sort of lean in to show how net zero can reindustrialise the north of England, rebuild our public transport system and make us a leader in green hydrogen and tidal power. That's what's at stake here. I think it's a fantastic opportunity, and also you can build a new economy by doing all of those things, by making energy more affordable to people, transport more affordable. Let's do it. It just feels to me that this country's crying out for that sort of an approach. And I think the cities are ready to line up with the government and go for it.
I love the enthusiasm. Steve, your final words, and then Mette.
Well, why don't we applaud that? Because it's right, isn't it? I will say to government, so I'm not just talking hypothetically, I will say to government, this is the time for you to be brave. Show a bit of courage. We could be world leaders. Look, we're not going to be world leaders in everything, but there are certain things that we can do here that lots of other places can't do. So we're surrounded by water, for instance. There's loads of things we could do there. And of course, we've got kids now who are much more environmentally aware than when, dare I say it, my age group was throwing everything into the same dustbin. So listen to the kids. The kids are right on track. And then see whether we can get the politicians to back some of the rhetoric with policies that do what we need it to do. It's not like this is an existential threat, that something's going to happen in the future. It's happening now.
Mette, very quickly, because I can see Andy has to hustle.
Sure. I mean, look, I think for us, the green transition is one of the biggest economic opportunities of the 21st century. It's an opportunity for us to also think about how we can redistribute wealth to working class communities and really fix the imbalance of our economies and a lot of the inequalities that we have. But also, just Steve's point, let's not betray future generations, because they will look at us and say to us, what did you do when you had the opportunity to speak out, to go and lobby your MP or us in power? What did you do? I spent my whole life saying, if only I was in a position where I can make a difference. And now I'm in a position where I can make a difference. Let me not wait. I don't want to waste it. So I think we owe it to future generations of this country to really deliver the ambition and the vision that Andy described. Thank you.
So with climate resilience running through the heart of this, let's give our fantastic mayors the massive round of applause so that they know when they have these discussions, they've got all of your support. Thank you very much.